What up, NBA fans? Welcome into another week of Dropping Dimes. I'm your host, Matt Knost, and full disclosure, I have not built out a show for you today. This is a first. I'm walking in completely blind, no topics to discuss specifically. Because normally I start building the show out 2-3 days in advance. Just what are the trends going? What do I find interesting? Who do I want to talk about? Whether it's team or individual, whatever the case is. And right now, I mean, it's so topsy-turvy. Something new happens. I mean, technically, like yesterday, Utah was back in first place for a half a moment, and then it goes right back to Phoenix once they get knotted up again. And then, you know, are the Wizards going to be able to keep climbing, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's so many things up in the air right now that once you start building one thing, you'll be like, shoot, it's either changed or the relevancy of it doesn't seem as immediate as other things. And the other reason I didn't build a show out is because I've been working down at my wife's pizza shop until the wee hours of the morning the past couple nights. Case in point, I got home at 4 something and then didn't get into bed until 5:15 or something. After I got home, had a snack because I was starving, and then jumped in bed. And the neighbors are doing construction. So construction started about 7:50 this morning. So I've had 2 hours and change of sleep. So the idea of building out a show, like I woke up and I was like, not today, not today. My brain is bleary, but I have watched. So since last week's show, I've watched a bunch of games. My wife is out of town over the weekend. So I was like, well, that means more NBA time for me instead of watching whatever TV shows we would watch together. I was flipping between game after game after game and just trying to watch as much as I could, take advantage of it. I think next week's show, I'm going to try and do all NBA, just who my vote would be for all of them. The other awards, like I mentioned, I think it was last week's show, I think they're all kind of done. MVP is done. Rookie of the Year is interesting because the odds-on favorite is Lonzo, and Lonzo's now back. But Anthony Edwards was, I think, had done enough to really solidly enter into that conversation. And according to the Vegas odds makers, it's Lonzo's still. Sixth man of the year, I think, is a fait accompli. It's going to go to Jordan Clarkson more than likely, unless some big, change. So anyway, I think the other awards are kind of set in stone on some level, which is weird. Whereas all NBA, I think, is all over the place. Depends on who you ask. So I want to do that then. Although next week's show, this week I'm tired. Next week, the day before Tuesday, I get my second vaccine. It's a Moderna. So statistically speaking, there's like a 60% chance that I'm going to be all sorts of groggy and tired on Wednesday. So that's going to be fun. But I will be able to build out the show before then and get it taken care of. So that's cool. I'm happy about that. So today, so those in the chat, let me know what you want to talk about. I'm here for you today. There's a number of you watching live, but that doesn't always translate into the chat itself. And a couple people have chimed in. Jeremy Bowers had the greatest NBA show out there. I appreciate that, Jeremy. And Jordan Anderson, it's at the Utah Jazz coming in here. They're on fire this year. They are on fire this year. And what's interesting right now, the projections are they're only going to have one All-NBA player, which is going to be Gobert. And he'll probably be a third teamer. I don't know if I go that route. I don't know if I just limit it to one. But the disrespect for Utah continues. I think the only way Utah is going to get respect is to go out and demand it, to go out and show to everybody that they are deserving of this higher seed. I mean, they'll have a good shot, just like Utah. I mean, just like Phoenix will. Because right now, if playoffs were in now, the NBA's worst nightmare in the West happens because you have Lakers Clippers in the 4-5, which means they play in the opening round. And in no way, shape, or form does the NBA want the two LA teams playing in the first round. Ideally, honestly, on some level, they would more than likely want Clippers, Lakers in the finals for the Western Conference. And then hypothetically, if it all shook out that way, Nets, Knicks. I don't know specifically if the NBA wants the Knicks, per se, in the Eastern Conference Finals. They sure as shit want the Nets just because of the star power, the wattage, and how much that would help with ratings. And no doubt the NBA wants the Lakers in this discussion. You have the marquee franchise with the marquee player, and then also Anthony Davis, no slouch himself. Although I watched that game against Toronto, and boy, they look rusty at times. But then I watched that game against Denver, and now while I don't think Facundo Campazzo necessarily fouled AD, the Lakers held strong. I really only saw like 10 minutes of that game, whereas the Toronto game, I watched that game start to finish. The impressive thing about the Toronto game is every time they needed a bucket, Lowry's like, oh, what do we need right now? 3? I'll shoot this 3. Hand in my face? No problem. What do we need? We need a 2? Okay, well, I'll dribble in close enough and then let the defense kind of collapse on me and find a guy who is cutting to the basket or something. It was a Lowry game. Another thing I don't understand at this point is when you watch Siakam, he gets the ball, right? If he is on the left wing, so if you're staring at the basket, he's on the left side of the basket and not all the way down near baseline, but 3-point line, somewhere between baseline and the top of the key. He is driving right about 90 to 95% of the time. And sometimes it bites them in the ass. Teams know it, and they just scheme for it and be like, go left. We dare you. And it's not like he's incompetent with his left, but he just seems so much more confident and secure going to his right. So he pushes to his right, and it's like 80% of his spin moves spin him to his right. It's weird that, he can be so effective scoring. And I realize I'm hyperbolic in those statistics but that's what it seems like when you watch. It's like, he's going right. He's going right. And in that game, there was numerous instances where defender gave him the slightest little window to go right, and he just immediately takes it. And yeah, the other crazy thing about that game is the Lakers are stellar on defense, and they gave up 70 points in the first half. Like Toronto was getting any bucket they wanted to and was hitting it. And it could be an anomaly. They weren't exactly dialed in like they were for the Nuggets game. But to get back to it, I mean, that first round matchup potentially of Clippers-Lakers, it'll be fun for us, although I wouldn't mind it later on while the stakes are higher, just to see if Paul George and the duo of Paul George and Kawhi will finally coalesce and come together and really bring some magic to this Clippers organization. But it'll be interesting nonetheless, and especially with the Lakers, they're in trouble of slipping back down even further with Schroeder out, and it doesn't look like LeBron's going to play every game to close out, and they only have 74, 8 games left. They're at 64 games right now. So with Schroeder being out another something like 9 to 13 days or 8 to 12 days at this point, he's going to miss the rest of the regular season, looks like. And they just haven't had, it's kind of like the Nets on the flip side over in the East. They haven't had their full core together to really see how the parts all fit together. So it'll be interesting come playoff time to see how that team coalesces. But so that, I mean, look at that. That's a great matchup in the opening round of the West. Denver, Dallas. That's fun and interesting. The way Denver's playing right now, got to favor Denver. Although if they had Jamal Murray, I wouldn't even hesitate. But we'll see if this Michael Porter Jr. thing continues. Phoenix would get, one of Portland, Golden State, Memphis, and San Antonio in the 2 position. This is according to I'm just double checking on this. Yeah. Utah would get, sorry, I hadn't refreshed on the standings. Utah would get one of those, and then Phoenix would get the overall winner-loser of the others. Yeah, so with that refresh, sorry, those standings were from yesterday afternoon, and this is how much it's changed. It would still be Clippers, Lakers in that first, but anyway, not here nor there. I'm sorry, I'm operating on 2 hours of sleep, 2.5 hours of sleep. And in the East, Knicks, Hawks, that's fun. Both the young teams coming up. Bucks, Heat, will Bucks be able to get revenge for last year? And then Nets in second, Philly in first. And the weird thing is, if the Nets are healthy, I still find it hard to go against the Nets. All right, here we go. So we have people in the chat. I asked you to chime in the chat. So Mnet, I've never seen that name before. Emnet, Mnet. Said MVP is done. I really think it's 55 Nikola, 45 CP3. I have a feeling CP3 is going to pull a Derrick Rose over LeBron in 2012. I think here's the difference. Had Denver not played so amazingly well since Jamal Murray went down, I think you might have a stronger case for CP3. And I'm not against CP3 being in this conversation, but Nikola's the only guy that's in this discussion, I believe, that hasn't missed a game. He's played every single second, or not every single second, but every single game, and he's played heavy minutes in every one of these games, and he's put up, otherworldly offensive stats, and his defense isn't as good as, say, someone like Embiid. It's not terrible. It's not like he's a one-way player. You can make a case that there are better two-way players, but it's MVP of the regular season, and he hasn't missed a second of the regular season. And then when Jamal Murray goes down, by rights, they should be deflated, and they just kept on winning. And he looks, after like they played the Clippers and beat the Clippers, and Paul George comes out and rightly says, that guy is amazing. You send a double to him, he finds the open man. If you don't double him, he's either going to find the open man or take the quality shot. Sometimes Jokic is his biggest flaw is that he's too good a passer because he passes up on shots that he should be taking, kind of a la Steve Nash during his MVP runs when he should have been shooting more threes. Although that's with the vision from today's game projected backwards onto that team at that time, which they were 7 seconds or less Suns, but shooting threes was not a priority as much as it is today. Although he was a 40 plus 3-point shooter. But I just think, given his overall durability, the fact that since game 1 to game 64-ish, I think that they're at, he has been the same the whole time. Really impressive. They're at 65 the whole time. So I think that's why. And I don't know, CP3 is just now entering into the overall discussion. I think by Vegas odds, Embiid might still be second on Vegas odds. And I believe over CP3 or like Lillard and Curry and Giannis might all be. Now, that could easily change in this last week, and those odds could differ, but I think it's done. Jokic is going to win this. And I don't know. The narrative is already kind of set in. So unless they fall off a cliff in these last 7 games, it would have to be they're still playing their starters at full heavy minutes and they fell off a cliff. If they're sitting Jokic a bunch, then voters are just going to be like, these don't count because he's not playing as much because they've already potentially locked up their seed or they're trying to stay away from the Lakers in the first round and jockeying for position. That's all a lot of teams are trying to do right now because they've been wounded for a big chunk of the season with injuries and COVID protocols, like what Schroeder's going through right now. But that doesn't mean that you don't want to avoid them, especially early on in the playoffs. Let's see, what other questions? So there's like some inner chat discussion going on. Jeremy Bowers has it, I guess, MVP, Nikola, CP3, and Randall for third. Look at that. Just jumping a bunch of other guys. I think Tibbs will get the credit for this, not Randall, and Tibbs will win Coach of the Year. That's just my guess. But this party's over, says top 5 most important Lakers. Well, it's relatively, top 5, what, most important to win a championship again? I think some of them are matchup dependent. It's LeBron, AD, and Schroeder, 1, 2, 3. And then after that, they need some sort of combination of other guys to step up. I love that Marc Gasol plays against the Nuggets and has a good game, but he's, playing good defense. Still can't get Marc Gasol to shoot for shit. Just for some reason, he does not want to shoot. But then afterwards, Vogel's like, he's a hell of a weapon. Like, especially with these lineups where you have other guys that can score, to have somebody in there that plays a great 2-man game with LeBron and also knows defensively. He's older, yes, but he knows where to position himself, and just knows the game kind of inside and out. It's like what Paul Shirley said when he was on a little while back, the former NBA player. He got better as he got older because he just knew where to be before the ball got there. And I think every veteran is like that. You need to rotate and shift and like recognize defensively when teams are doing whatever, and just read the game. And to have that another high IQ out there, I'll be intrigued to see what they do in the playoffs with this big man rotation, because Harrell's minutes will probably be limited even more, because if he's going to be in there, then if the team they're facing off against has any kind of pick and roll action, then they're just going to target Harrell over and over and over again until the Lakers are forced to take him out and do something else. But I think it's those 3 and then a combination of some of their bigs or Caruso, KCP, THT, Kuzma, who amongst this other collection of individuals is going to be able to step up and provide us a punch that night. And last year they had the depth to kind of get it from a few different guys on different nights. KCP showed up big, Caruso, Kuzma. But I'll be it'll be interesting to watch. Emmett says, thoughts on the Wizards charge, Russ's latest hot streak? Do you think any of the top four are worried to face the Wiz at all? I think in a 7 game, no. Nobody should be fearful of facing the Wizards. Especially if like they come in, they end up as the number 8 and they got to take on Philly. They have no answer for Embiid. Put Simmons on Beal, and now you're forcing Russ to play hero ball. And that's where Russ can get into trouble. It's, you got to love Russ. He has all the confidence in the world, which is precisely what you want. But there are those nights where, he shoots like 6 for 19 or, 4 for 17. You're like, dude, you need to stop. And a bunch of missed threes, and he's not getting to the line enough. Although I would credit the officials with not getting to the line. He drives still and drives, quite a bit. So forcing Russ into hero ball, I think, is going to be their Achilles, because they got not a whole hell of a lot else. Bertans or Hachimura or Abdijah, it's, you really can't rely on any of those guys just yet. Potentially in the future, I guess. But to be a consistent third option, they just don't have it. So if you can shut Beal down and then play upon Russ's propensity to play hero ball, I think I wouldn't be worried about the Wizards from especially somebody like the Scissors, because you got Tybal as well. So Simmons and Tybal, even if you get more run out of them, but their defense is so solid. And if they were to play the Nets in the first round, say they'd have to climb all the way to the 8th seed and then win that opening game, which they could do. And then they would go up to technically the 7th seed, and they play the number 2, which would be the Nets. But they just can't match offensive firepower over a 7-game series with the Nets, especially if the Nets are healthy. That's a big if at this point, but I just don't foresee it. Although it is great to see the Wizards playing this well. I mean, if you recall the start of the season, I projected them to make the playoffs just because Russ had carried teams kind of like this, minus Bradley Beal, but kind of like this, to the playoffs in the West, and that is no small feat. So it's just like him and Brad Beal together. That's a recipe for playoffs. So I'm surprised it took him this long to gel, but perhaps it was just helping to formalize the identity within the team and helping to set a tone and a culture that they were missing. The story that Russ, like 2 months back, 2.5 months back-ish, somewhere in there, at practice, had everybody not named Russ and Brad Beal stand up and tell all their other teammates their role, how they saw their role on this team. And since then, they've been playing more consistent basketball. And as of late, they've been, it's them and the Knicks, in essence, who's hotter right now. And like in a third place, the Nuggets. So it's been great to watch. And I love Westbrook. For a couple of years there, he was my favorite player in the NBA. And it's not like I don't love him as much anymore. I just, you move on. New guys come in and you get infatuated with them and watch them a whole bunch. And then more new guys come in. And so I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Russ. But it's tough to watch at times when he's just forcing it, especially when he's having a piss poor night from 3 and he just continues to shoot threes. You got to love the confidence, but at the same time, he's too smart to do that. He should know when he's off and then just start driving, because you get a couple shots in closer, maybe it helps you kind of figure out where your shooting stroke was going awry from three. And it's not like he lacks for confidence, but seeing the ball go in helps no matter what. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I don't think they have in a best of 7, but I think that's, they could be interesting in those play-in games. Oh, Jeremy says, I think he meant top 5 most important Lakers ever. It was a topic last week. This party's over. That's kind of like an off-season topic, which I'm happy to discuss. But top 5 Lakers ever, that's like a whole meaty discussion. Put it to you this way. Lakers top 5 starting 5 of all time. Like who's their best center? That's actually an exceedingly difficult question to answer. You got Wilt, Kareem, and Shaq. Pick your poison. Who do you want? And that's just at center. So the Lakers, I mean, who's their best guard of all time? Oh, great. Magic, Jerry West, Kobe. You can do this all day long with the Lakers. They have an embarrassment of riches. And the one thing I will say for the Lakers is it's family owned. This isn't some huge hedge fund coming in, buying the team and then suddenly, dumping a bunch of money into it, or, a Russian oligarch buying into the Nets and then suddenly pumping money. Now it's a, Chinese, not quite oligarch, but technogarch. That's not a real world, but yeah, he's a 10-cent guy. But have these super deep pockets, which technically the Lakers do not. And they still manage to put out a winning product by and large year in, year out. And now the lure of the team is so large that you can attract somebody like LeBron. Although being in LA helps with that as well. And his outside interests of wanting to produce TV shows and movies and be in movies, et cetera. But still, the Lakers have quite a bit to offer. So top 5 of all time, that's a huge in-depth discussion. And yeah, the party's over even brings up Mikan from the Minnesota days. Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's 4 centers right now that are all Hall of Fame level. They all are Hall of Fame, but like upper pantheon Hall of Fame. And they've had all of them. So the Lakers starting 5 is a great discussion, but one I think we'll save for another day. Jake Cleveland asks, are the Jazz or the Suns a bigger threat coming out of the West? I would say the Jazz, just in that they have more veterans. And that has not, that's translated into first round wins, but not necessarily second round wins with this group. But you have guys that have been around longer, whereas Phoenix is a youth movement helmed by Chris Paul at this point. So we don't really know what they're like in the playoffs, and we don't know how they're going to react, into those more high pressure situations where all eyes are going to be on, them, and they're going to be dissecting. The talking heads are going to be talking about nothing other than the previous night's matchups and games. So I think Phoenix, having gone through this, and everybody that's going to have any kind of major playing time has been in the playoffs. So outside of CP3, there's not a lot of playoff depth on Phoenix. They got a bunch of interesting guys and interesting pieces, and they're a lot of fun to watch. And CP3 has entered into the MVP discussion because once again he's gone to a team and they are now much better for having CP3 than they were the year before. That being said, though, Phoenix was trending in the right direction, and they almost made it into the play-in game last year in the bubble as they rattled off, 8 straight wins to close out the regular season and made it a discussion and was part of the early success of the bubble when you started to feel like, oh, this thing could really work. And ultimately it did. So they were in a playoff-like atmosphere for those games as they needed to keep winning. And then Memphis kept losing, so it became more and more a discussion. But, Booker's never been in the NBA playoffs. We're going to find out. That's why I favor Utah. We've seen Donovan Mitchell be the best player in a series. So we haven't seen Book do that. We've seen CP3 do it, but at the same time, once you get past CP3, it's like slim pickings going tete-a-tete, here. Whereas Gobert, Ingles, Bogdanovich with the Pacers, he got some playoff run, but Mike Conley has done it. So all their guys, Jordan Clarkson has been to the finals. So I would say the Jazz. That would be my choice. All right. Does anybody else have anything? Because once again, I didn't prepare for today, just outside circumstances, and also league has been so topsy-turvy. This party's over is now rifling, great off-season topics, but we'll get to the off-season topics when we get to the off-season. His is about the Olympics, who will be there and who won't be. Initial thoughts. I don't know. We'll see, because I don't even know. All right, Chris Miner's got one. Will the Spurs retain their spot, or will the Pels end up taking the 10th? I mean, the Pels are 2 games back, and right now they're both playing 500 ball. So you would assume that the Spurs would get it. Although I'll tell you this much. If I am anybody in the league that has to square off against these teams, I want the Spurs. Just because night in, night out, the upside of the Pelicans is so high. Now, it's a consistency issue, but the upside is so high that you could end up losing. They could fight their way from the 10th. I could talk myself into realistic believing that they could fight their way in from the 10th and make it into that 1-8 matchup. Then you have to go off, against right now Phoenix. It could be Utah, depending on how things shake out. And a best of 7. Then it goes right back to, well, what kind of game are we gonna get from anybody not named Zion on this team? And but there'll be a handful regardless. I just think 2-game lead. They're both playing 500 ball over the last 10 games. The Pels have looked better as of late, and Zion is having a really good season. I'd be interested, if you took a snapshot of this team now, 2 years from now, how much change is made. I still don't know if Brandon Ingram is there. I think you could formulate a better team to fit around Zion, because Zion is the future of that team. And by all accounts, it looks like Zoe's going to be gone in the offseason. So they're already going to be making some changes. But I think the Spurs retain that spot as of right now. Basically, let me see. They both have Spurs have 8 games left. Pels have 6. So to overcome that too, that basically the Pels need to win their 6, and San Antonio pretty much needs to lose 5 of those 8 in order to make this a reality. 6 of those 8, yeah, basically. At that point, so 36 and 36. Yeah. Something along those lines. D-Train asked, will James Harden return just in time for the playoffs? I actually haven't seen an update as of right now as to his projected timeline. You know, I wouldn't be, if I'm then, I wouldn't be too concerned, technically speaking, with that first round matchup. You know, it's going to be some combination of Boston, Charlotte, Indy, and Washington. I think if it's anybody but Boston, I would rest easy. Just with Brown and Tatum, because you have 2 guys who are all-stars and, you know, borderline all-NBA. I'm not saying, now by borderline all-NBA's top 15 people, we could be saying like top 30, top 25. So it's not like I'm saying it, oh, they're 15, 16 looking in, but they're of some close to caliber of that type of player, especially Tatum. So Brown, you know, Tatum could be like 17 or 18. Brown could end up being like 25, 26, somewhere in that ballpark. But if they had those 2 guys really clicking, and then Kemba has a few good games, Marcus Smart plays the way that you always want Marcus Smart to play, it's like suddenly the Celtics are the Celtics, which is a team to be feared. So I haven't seen a timeline on Harden as to when he'll be back, although I haven't looked either. So it's a good question. Other than they need to get him back. It's amazing how much, but it's not amazing actually, but you would think that KD and Kyrie would be fine because you still have, you know, the surrounding constituent parts that you've had all season, and the polarity of having KD versus having Harden. It's not even the tandem of Harden and KD is lethal, versus Kyrie. And I like Kyrie, but I just think ultimately, if he's at the helm, I think it's a beatable team. And then Chris Miner says the Spurs have a tough schedule too to close out. Well, you know, COVID protocols hurt them early on, so they have to pack in more games than everybody else. Yeah, coupled with a difficult schedule, not going to help. But anyway, I think I'm going to call it there. It's a shorter show today, but all right, 2 people rifled in questions or comments really quick. With the Bucks beating the Nets twice, do you think the Nets need Harden to compete in the East? Yes, I do. To genuinely compete to make the Eastern Conference Finals, without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's not even close. And then Andres Ortiz says, how do you solve the ref issues not being fair with their calls? Lenient sometimes, strictly the next. There's no way. Human error, unfortunately, because otherwise, I hate the games where it devolves into let's go check the replay. That's not this game. We've all watched basketball for a long time, and or played basketball for a long time. So it's about flow and momentum. And when you disrupt that by constantly going to double check and triple check calls, it's not fun to watch. And I can't imagine that you get into much of a groove as a player. So I don't know. Unless it comes down where somehow, you know, the league dictates that this is how we're calling a game every single game. But even then, A, I don't see that happening. And B, you still have people running this. So human error is going to creep back in all over again. So the fluctuations within how they call games, especially during the regular season, is just going to be there. In the postseason, it's kind of let them play. And I think we all appreciate that. But during the regular season, it depends on what crew you get. And, the interesting thing is what history does this guy have? Who was it? Was it, dang it. I want to say it was Rick Carlisle saying that he's only been teed up 3 times and happened to be from the same official. So you read into that whatever you want. So yes, there are personal vendettas that creep up, not as much as there used to be. Like, go look at the Joey Crawford. It was just the anniversary of him teeing up Duncan from the bench because Duncan was laughing. And I'm guessing he had already had words with Crawford, but Crawford felt it was at his expense about something. And the NBA fined him for that. Hefty fine too, especially for a ref. It's one thing when you see like, oh, player X got fined $35,000, which is a monumental sum of money. But when it's, a fraction of what they make in a given year, it doesn't have quite the punch. Whereas when you hand down a fine that is 5 to 10% of what a guy makes, like, that's a hell of a fine. Anyway, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that, other than coaching them up better. I know that Cuban has some ideas about this as to why, in his eyes, the reffing has gotten bad in recent time, and B, how to combat the problem and really address it. So anyway, I'm calling it right there, guys. My brain is turning to mush slowly but surely. But next week, look for I'll be doing all NBA. And if you don't know, all NBA is in essence the top 15 players in the league, but you have to eschew to front court and back court. And there are requirements within this. So I'll be doing that. Although I wish it landed kind of later. And then the playoffs are damn near upon us. 6 to 8 games left for basically every team in the NBA. So playoffs are so close. So close. I'm looking forward to it. I kind of wish it was bubble style where it was 4 games, 5 games a day, and I could just sit and watch basketball all day. I loved that last year. One of my highlights of quarantine, and in no way am I joking. Loved every second of that. Watched so much basketball in such a condensed amount of time. Anyway, that is it for Dropping Dimes today. Thank you to everybody that joined me in the chat. I needed your help today. You guys came through with flying colors. I'm thankful that so many people chimed in with great questions. And this party's over. Save those for an off-season show, especially the Lakers one. Remind me of it later because it's a good discussion. And perhaps I'll bring you on and get your 2 cents on it. Because there is no definitive answer on who's the best. It's like the Jordan LeBron debate. Who's the GOAT? Well, first off, I think it's impossible on some level to compare players across eras, but they're close enough in time that you could compare these two. But 2, it's so subjective, especially if you grew up with them. Like I did with Jordan and what this newest generation has done with LeBron. It's like trying to talk to my younger cousins and nephews and whatnot that have been watching LeBron his whole life or their whole lives. To say that he's not the greatest of all time is blasphemous, and I understand that. You were an impressionable young kid and you saw this guy do amazing things, and no one will ever be able to do those amazing things quite like he did. You're not wrong. LeBron is a generational talent, second best player I've ever seen. But I got a bias to Jordan for all the reasons that you love LeBron. I grew up with him. Makes him somewhat unassailable. The guy was invincible. Anyway, that is it for Dropping Dimes today. You can follow me anywhere at Matt Knost. Thank you to everybody that helped me through today's sleep-deprived show with no real blueprint. No idea what we're going to talk about. We danced around. We did all kinds of stuff. I liked it, guys. We did a waltz. You helped me. You guys led. I followed, and it was a lot of fun. That is it for today's Dropping Dimes. I'll see you guys next week with another edition. Until then, stay safe out there. Stay 6 feet apart. I'll see you guys. Next week's show is the day after I get my second shot, so hopefully I won't be too crabby. We'll find out. But until then, I'll see you guys next week. Adios.